Welcome to Leveraging Inspiration, the Inspired Patent Podcast, where we help you understand and leverage your intellectual property. I'm your host, Wayne Carroll, and I'm excited to bring you insights and stories from the success and failures of others and teach you how to win at the game of intellectual property. I always start with a disclaimer. The information I provide on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not providing legal advice, and nothing in this podcast should be construed as creating an attorney-client relationship. This week, we are joined with attorney Scott Gibson, an expert on trade secrets, and we're going to be discussing what are those first steps in implementing a trade secret program. So, Scott, one of the ways you help companies protect trade secrets is through litigation. In your litigation cases and consultations, do you see more theft of trade secrets from hacking or some other kind of security breach or from employees?
Hands down, the greatest risk to your trade secrets are the nice people who work in your office and take home a paycheck and send their kids to school with the money that you give them. Hands down, your greatest risk is from theft by your employees, by the nice people who work with you.
Okay, yeah.
There are some instances where hackers break in. That's probably not the experience of most of very many, I should say, small businesses in particular. But for almost every business, there is a former employee who has taken or has threatened to take valuable information from the company.
Yeah, I understand the FBI has actually done some surveys and come up with an estimate. I think they estimated about 50% of all employees leave with confidential information they should not take with them. So
that would not be surprising. Sometimes people justify it in that, I created this idea, forgetting that you were paid to create the idea for the employer. Sometimes people have had an idea when they came in that they worked and developed over the years that they worked for the company, and so they feel some sort of ownership in that. But it's not at all surprising that there is a high percentage that take things with them when they leave.
yeah, so I focus on patents, and it's very common in an initial consultation for me to ask them, who do you work for? Where does your main income come from? And, what is your job description? If they're a janitor, there's much less likely that they have been hired to engineer, invent, and improve things. But if they have a title of engineer, they are at great risk to go on their own and invent and patent something without really clearing it with their employer. But before a business owner says, oh, I just need a strong agreement, what do they need to do before they get that strong agreement?
What is it we're protecting?
Right.
Help me understand your business. Help me understand what it is you think is your trade secret and why you think it is a trade secret. Once we figure that out, then we can draft an agreement that is appropriate.
In some ways, it sounds kind of similar to what I go through with a client on patents. I say, well, what do you have? Why do you think it's unique and patentable? And also I ask them, I was recently talking to somebody about a method of doing something, and it involved satellites. And I said, well, let's talk about how you enforce this. If something's happening on a satellite, how do you know that's happening if somebody else is doing it? Can you enforce this patent? And if we were able to get a patent, and so we talk through, their employer, what is it they have that's unique, and is that even enforceable if they got a patent on it? So is it similar in the same ways?
It is. We need to figure out what you have. what is it you want me to protect? And not a generic description, not, I don't want to hear my confidential information. I want to hear, I want to protect something. It would be something like this. I want to protect my customer database, the information contained in that customer database, because we've spent the last 15 years developing that information, and we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building that database so that it is valuable and protectable. That's the kind of detail I want to hear.
Okay. Yeah, and sometimes companies might not realize the gold that's in there. For instance, if they've been tracking contracts, when does their contract expire? If that's the type of business they're in, where they're doing services and it's a 1 to 5 year contract, that contract expiration date isn't something they really want in the hands of their competitors, who know right when to go in to your clients and say, hey, we've got a great deal for you.
An insurance agency would be a good example of that type of a business.
Yeah.
Where policy renewal dates would be very important to know.
That is definitely not generally known. I can't look up and see when my neighbor's automobile policy is up for renewal. The work of defining your trade secret and understanding you say in one of your articles, the metes and bounds of your trade secret. Is that something that's a do-it-yourself project? And should you be working with an expert on that?
I think it depends on the value of your trade secret, what you think your secret sauce is worth. The more valuable it is, certainly the more effort you should make to work with an expert in the field. Can you do it on your own? I suppose you can. As my dad once told me, he said, it's legal to do that, but you can also remove your own appendix, but you may not want to. It's the problem is you may not know what you don't know, and you don't know where the concerns and where the challenge points are. So it'd always be advisable to visit with an expert.
And do people work with you when they're defining that? Do you basically like give them homework and say, okay, go gather this information, and then we'll legally define it. We'll put it in a document?
I have a checklist that's quite extensive that I give to my clients, and I'll say, go fill this out. In fact, it sometimes discourages some of them from moving forward, but we go through and I say, talk to me about what your business is, who your competitors are, what are the things that you do, why is your business special? How are you different from the competition? And we go through a series of questions. We talk about who has access to different information. So all of that goes into the consideration of what type of an agreement might you want to do, or might you need to address your particular situation.
Okay. One of your articles you talk about, and you mentioned this in the previous episode briefly, was making your intangible asset appear tangible. So what do you mean by that?
You bet. If you think about it, intangible assets are interesting because there's no substance to them. I love a book written by Harry Beckwith, who is a lawyer, trained as a lawyer, who's worked in marketing for years. He wrote a book called Selling the Invisible. The book that I like that he wrote in particular is called What Clients Love. And in that, in one of his books, he talks about how you can't evaluate a service or an intangible asset before you get it. So you can't try out a haircut. You can't check to see if the dry cleaner's any good. You go in, request the service, it's given to you, and then you're stuck with whatever is there. So part of that, the same concept that you use in marketing intangible assets, is the concept that we need to look at in terms of building form and substance on your intangible assets. For example, maybe you need to give your thing a name. This bundle of air that you have, give it a name. At Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, it's not that stuff that the Colonel puts on the chicken. It's called the Secret 11 Herbs and Spices. So by giving it a name, they've started to give some substance to that. Farmers had the slogan, fast, friendly, and fair. Okay, that is giving some substance to their intangible asset. That's what we need to do here. We need to identify it. We need to give it scope. We need to figure out what it is. And then we start giving things that make it seem more tangible. The beauty of that is once you do this right, you have a distinguishing factor that you can use to market your business ahead of your competitors. We're different from our competitor because we have 11 herbs and spices.
Right.
That's why we're different. So it goes hand in hand with the marketing that you're doing for these intangible assets.
Right. But you don't go to the marketing department to get this. You start on the top and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build this, and then we're going to hand it to the marketing department.
We want to use the same techniques and principles and concepts that the marketing department is going to use, and we'll use those to help define and develop and take our intangible asset and make it real.
Right. Okay. So you make a black box with a name on it. You say, this is the black box.
Yes.
It's got a name. All right. Well, we're out of time for this episode. It goes really fast, but we'll be back in just a minute. We're going to talk about the do's and don'ts for those agreements, the non-disclosure agreements, the employee agreements. And so thank you for joining us. This is Wayne Carroll and Scott Gibson with Leveraging Inspiration.